My name is Wayne and welcome back to the channel. Today's video I've been waiting to do for a long time. We're going to start out by putting the Baer brakes on the back of the car. That's right, I have never had an old car with good brakes, and this is something I've always wanted to do. So I'm super excited about it. So we have two big boxes from Baer, and these include the rear brakes for the car. Let's open up these boxes, I'll show you what they look like, and then we're going to put them on the car. Man, I've been so excited and wanting to do this project for a long time. Baer brakes. There's a lot of options out there, but I chose Baer. I love their product and all the different options they have. You see right here, these are the rears. Let's get into it. Take a look. All right. Here we have some lines. Jounce lines, rubber lines, and hardware. Okay, these, one thing I really like about their kit is they have a really solid parking brake design. So I'm gonna get into that. That is pretty cool. Definitely want a parking brake. Being a 4-speed car would be a lot simpler if I didn't have to have one, but we're gonna go with theirs, and hopefully like my parking brake cable all works with this, but we'll see. All right, we'll put this on the workbench in a few minutes. Now we're gonna get into the other box, which should have the rotor. I've already opened it. I was doing some test fitting with it, but check that out. Man, this is the 13-inch 2-piece slotted and cross drilled rotor. Man, this is it. Incredible. What a sweet piece, man. We're gonna have some killer brakes on this car now. Yeah, check that out. 13 inches on the money. Man, that is killer. You know, I like the idea of the 2-piece rotor. For one, it's gonna help cooling, and then two, for maintenance down the road, rather than having to replace the whole rotor, you can just replace the outside, right? So it's all fastened in with Loctite and hardware, all premium components. Man, that's gonna be killer. Unbelievable. 13-inch. All right, so here's the parking brake assembly. So that should be interesting, figuring out how all that goes together. But I've been looking at it online, and it doesn't look too bad, but I know one reason why I haven't put my axles in yet is because this has to go on first. Of course, we have a little license plate frame, instruction sticker, a little syringe, it looks like for bleeding the system, flushing it all out. All right, now is the time for the brake calipers. All right, check these out. That's right. Whew. Check those out. So this color is called competition yellow, and I just love it. You know, I wanted some contrast, and when I was doing some research and looking at, you know, red cars with different color calipers, one of the first things that came up, it might sound funny, but is Ferraris. You know, they are predominantly red, and they make theirs in competition yellow. It's not a mustard yellow, but I think it looks great. Matter of fact, let's go throw it up against the car right now to take a look. I know this is the front of the car and the rear caliper, but man, I think that's gonna look money. That is awesome. A little contrast. It's gonna look, I think, great with the red and look good behind my wheels, which you'll see in a few weeks. But man, that's killer. So cool. I love it. Red and yellow. Nice. Man, you don't realize how big 13 inches, man. Check that out. It's bigger than my head. Holy crap. We're gonna have some serious stopping power now, huh? Man, I'm just excited. This is gonna be so cool. Look at that. That is awesome. Such a I mean, the craftsmanship and detail is incredible with these. So you got bleeds on both sides, so you need the bleeder pointed up. However, you end up rotating your caliper. Oh wow, so slick. 4-piston, right? Oh man. All right, let's figure out what we gotta do first. And one thing that's really cool about Baer is they have installation instructions online, as well as a brake template for each of their brake systems. So I printed it out, to scale, and I trimmed it out, and then I used some glue stick, put it on cardboard, then I trimmed up the cardboard, and you can take this and set it in your wheel and check for rotor and caliper clearance in your wheel. So it really takes all the guesswork out of it. So it's so nice. We're a great peace of mind. You don't have to wonder. And yeah, so we'll look at that later when we move on to the wheels. But it's also nice they do have real paper instructions that come with it. So that's a nice touch. And the rotors are directional, so the vanes are going to be pointing if you say like forward. So in this instance, this is the left rotor. That kind of wore off because I was test fitting a bunch of things. But now that we're taking a look at the brakes, it's time to get started putting them on the car. All right, so I found out that the retainer for the axle and the bearing will not clear this little bracket that holds the little expander for the parking brake shoes. You can see if you look straight down on it, this overhangs it, and it can't, or else literally the ring won't slide. It's such a tight fit. So I'm just going to go in there with my cartridge roll and just clean this up, and so we have clearance. If you're new to the channel, you'll know where my car is at. That means the brakes and axles are already out of the car. So the first few steps of installing this, we don't have to follow because everything's already apart and it's pretty much ready for assembly. The instructions do talk about on the parking brake mechanism that there is this brake shoe that you can remove if you need to. So let's say if your axles are in the car already, you don't plan on taking them out or you don't want to, the way you could slide this over possibly is by removing the shoe. So it is just hand tight. So the first thing we're going to do is tighten up the brake shoe because we won't need to take that apart, and that's a good thing. So it keeps it simpler for us. All right, so now we have the shoe attached, and the way this is going to mount up is the calipers on this brake kit have them in the rear. So this is going to be the driver's side parking brake assembly. So caliper on the rear, and your cable, we'll have to figure out the cables and how that's going to attach later. That's probably going to be in another video. So now let's look at how this is going to go on. So here's a bracket that comes with it. It's going to help attach this to the housing and then the parking brake mechanism to this. So what we're going to do is we'll kind of do it in reverse order, right? So we'll have a gasket that goes on the housing, and then this bracket, and the parking brake assembly, and the axle will slide through this thing. So yeah, let's give it a try. First thing, we'll line up our gasket, and now we're going to put on this plate. This guy, huh? I think, we could easily bolt this together while it's off the car, but it'll be simple enough to do, I guess, right now. Or maybe not. Alright, so we have this plate just snugged up now. Once it's bolted on the car, we'll come back and torque that down. And now that assembly's on. And now we're going to get the axle and slide the axle in. I've already put a little grease on the inside axle seal. And you just want to carefully slide it through. You don't want to, especially the splines, you don't want the splines dragging on that axle seal. Although It's kind of interesting. I've heard people talk about it. If you think about it, the green bearing is a sealed bearing, so it already has a seal on the inside, and then there's an O-ring on the outside to seal it to the housing flange. So I've heard people not even run an inner seal on the actual axle housing. You can, it fits. It's kind of like a double seal, and I always have, and I always will. But I know some people have it. So, and this is where things start to get a little bit tight. And we'll see if we can get it all lined up and slid in. Let's see if I have enough clearance. So that's why I clearance that parking brake assembly, so I can get the collar on the studs and right inside that little recessed area on the parking brake structure. It's a little tight in there, that's for sure. So what I'm going to try to do with this punch is just kind of get that ring started over the studs, because again, it's a tight fit. See, that would be another advantageous if you wanted to take this parking brake shoe off, and that you could do it. It would make things easier to get to the little ring. But if you can get it started, we'll just say might save us a little time and having to deal with taking all that off. So, all right, I actually have. Well, it's hard to see. But it's already started. I have a few threads showing. Let me try to show you with the camera. I don't know if you can see or not inside there, but I'm trying to show you how that ring. There you go. See? There she is. All right. So now that it's started, all we have to do is get our axle nuts and go through our axis hole and spin the axle around like you normally would to start it and get that thing all torqued down to 45 foot-pounds. All right, so what you need is just a 3/8 extension, and I like to use a short socket. That way it holds your nut in place. Obviously the car has to be in neutral so you can spin the axles. All right, that one started. And we're just gonna slide this around. So what I found on the other side, which I'd already started, was that if I didn't use the cartridge roll and grind off that little area of the parking brake, I could not slide the collar on for the axle. So I was trying, I'm like, why isn't this thing fitting? Sure enough, to do it this way without taking the brake shoe off, it had to be just smoothed out, clearance just enough so you can get that on, because this way, on this approach, you know, that collar for the axle has to go straight on. There can't be any imperfections. It's a really tight tolerance. Now maybe if you had the shoe off, you could kind of like wiggle it in, maybe from a little bit from an angle, but man, I didn't want to take that stuff off if I didn't have to. So, and the last one, number 5. Nice. All right, so gonna go with the torque wrench so we can torque these down and be done. There you go, 5 for 5. Now, when you bring your socket out of this hole, you want to be careful, because if you catch your socket on the inside of your axle flange and knock it off, well, guess what? You are up a creek. Ask me how I know. There is not enough room to pull it out. What I was able to do, though, is I was able to snake it back onto my extension and pick it up and pull it back out. But you just want to be careful, because you don't have a lot of room in here now to access anything. But this is all, assembly's all done, and now we can start working on our caliper. And this bracket is still just loose, so we have to snug that up right now. Because the same thing we'll have to do, just like we did with our front brakes, is we have to bolt this on snug, hand tight, bolt on the caliper, well, and the rotor, and then check our clearances and see where our rotor's at, because our rotor has to be perfectly centered inside the caliper. Now that we have the rear parking brake assembly and the axle in, we can install the rotor and the caliper. And again, you want to make sure the rotor is always facing the correct direction, and the slots in the rotor are going to point forward, and the ones from Baer are labeled. And you want to hold it on with 3 lug nuts and washers. Alright, we're going to put on our 3 washers, and then choose your 3 lug nuts, and just hold this in place, right? So you want this moving while we're trying to find perfect center for the rotor and the caliper. So once the caliper is centered and all dialed in with the rotor, we can take these off, and the pads will hold it in place. But while we take our measurements, the pads need to be out, so we can take our measurements at the 4 corners of the caliper and the rotor. So we're just going to get the pads out of the caliper. They come out real easy. Slide them inwards, and they drop out from the bottom. And they have these little spring clips. There you go. Couldn't be easier. Let's go bolt that in. Made in the USA. Love that. So I just backed out the bolts that hold the caliper in place just enough so we can slide it in and check our fitment. See if we are close with bolting this thing up at all. And we are. I'm going to thread the bolts into the caliper and see where it sits without any shims to start with, and go from there. It looks pretty close. Ouch. So it's bolted in. Let's go get the calipers, paper, and pen, and take some measurements and write those down. Alright, so let's start with the top outside. On the fronts, I was able to take the measurements on the inside, but I just don't have enough engagement to be able to reach the rotor, so I'm doing it on the outside inner corners, if you will. So have to do. So that looks to be 39.392. So write that down. And top inside, 0.392. Holy smokes. That doesn't happen very often, that's for sure. You should play the lottery, bingo. Just double check. Yeah, sure enough. All right, let's try to do the bottom. Gonna have the creeper for this one. The inside is 0.357. I can already tell it's not sitting really straight on there. Alright, that one's 0.376. Oh, not too far off. So it looks like we need it's only about 20 thou difference, like a 10 thou shim to bring it in perfect. Let's double check it all. Alright, so looking at my measurements on the left rear, we're working on the top and bottom. Again, the top, man, checked out great. 392, 392. Unbelievable actually, but I double checked them, they look good. The bottom, we're looking at like 357 to 376, like 20 thou difference. So give or take, and we're going to try the smallest shim. Okay, and since we have a larger gap on the outside, we need to bring the caliper in. So I'm going to slide one shim in. Hopefully this will do the trick. Alright, it's a little tricky getting the shims in, you know, like you can't see great back there, and the brackets are obviously very tight to where it needs to be threaded into. But we got it. So now you can tighten everything up again. There was my line. I'll just leave it down there this time. Okay. This did not move. Alright. Let's double check that measurement. I'm up here. Let me do the top. Alright, so now we're back. So originally I had 2 shims or I should say I started out with one shim and then 2 and 1. Then I'm like, why take away 1? So I took away 1 on top and bottom to where I'm just back with 1 in the bottom, but I'm measuring at the pads with the feeler gauge, the rotor. So now the outside measurement was 38, and I think we're gonna be really close. So I'm gonna check the inside. All right, on the inside, I'm coming up with like 41. Let's write that down. And let's just try that on the outside. It's a little loose. Let's try a 48 on the outside. Ooh, that is pretty good. Maybe just a little bit. On the outside, that is going to be a 49. So 49 and 41 is what I'm coming with the feeler gauge. Man, I think that's as close as I can get. I'm going to torque everything down and check it one more time, but I'm good with it. All right, the torque for the bracket to the backing plate or the parking brake assembly for the caliper is 85, and the caliper is going to be 75. Let's do the base bracket first. Ooh. All right, that's 85. Now the caliper at 75. All right, so here's our rear brake hardware. Comes with 2 stainless braided lines, and they're really nice. They have the Baer logo on them. They have the really nice rubber grips, so you can have a good grip on the line while you're tightening things. And then there's obviously your banjo bolt and your copper crush washers that are one-time use only that you'll use on each side of your fitting. And then it comes with another fitting that's going to be secured to this bracket that you're going to use a hose clamp to at the end of your axle housing. So there's a little slot in here. You'll thread or feed the worm gear clamp through, and then you'll have this go through, or as such. And then when your typical, retaining nuts will slide and secure it there. So now let's go look at the axle and see what we have to work with. All right, first you want to unscrew the plug on the back of the caliper. There's a little red plastic threaded cap. We'll keep that in case you ever need to service your calipers or send them back into Baer. That'll come in handy. And now we're going to assemble our banjo bolt with the 2 crush washers. And it's important whenever you're doing these, you always want to make sure this fitting's loose, this end of the line is loose. That way you can just hand tighten it into the caliper. Because if there's any binding at all on that end of the braided line, you could easily cross thread that bolt in your caliper, which is aluminum, and you don't want to do that. Okay, so it is just snug for now. We're not going to torque that down because there is a torque rating for that. I want to say it's like 15 pounds. But now we want to figure out where we might want to put our brake line so it's out of the way. But maybe actually like this, at a slight angle, which is fine. But what I'm also going to have to take into consideration is the main brake line back here on the car, on the axle. So this is a new brake line I bought when I was getting the car on the road. So this brake line is stainless steel. I got it from Inline Tube. It's a really nice quality brake line. And some people say they're harder to flare. I've never personally had to flare a stainless brake line, but I know people that have, and it's not a problem as long as you follow the procedure and you have a good quality flaring kit. Okay, so this is the left rear brake line, the short one that goes from the block on the axle over to the driver's side. And originally this had a bend, a 90, going into the wheel cylinder. So I'm just trying to straighten this thing out, trying to get that little bend out of it, which I did. It's got a touch of a kink, so I'm just trying to straighten it out the best I can, and then I'll set it in the car and figure out maybe I can do another 90 into, you know, this block that's going to be secured to the axle housing. So we'll have to figure out how much space we have, but first I want to see if I can straighten out this stainless line. So far so good, but yeah, we'll see. I don't have a fancy tube bender, that's for sure, but that's all right. Okay, so I just threaded this brake line back into this block, and it comes up at around the U-bolts. And originally, like I said, it came up here and then did a 90 into the wheel cylinder, but I straightened it out. And I have my bracket secured. It's just still loose so I can spin it around, but the stainless braided line is a pretty nice straight path up and around the axle, and it has a pretty soft bend down here. It's not pinched or kinked. And it's going to be clear of everything, as well as the emergency brake cable. Once I figure that out, that'll be well inboard of it by a good amount. So I think all I have to do now is try to put a bend right about here into this guy, which will probably be the challenge, but I think we can do it. So yeah, we'll give it a try. Okay, so we just put the hose line back in, and it all fits up pretty nice. I mean, we have a couple extra little bends, obviously, but I think with a little more finessing, and I think it's going to work just fine. So, yeah, we have good clearance. I like it too because this braided brake line is going to be out of the way of everything going underneath the axle, and yeah, we don't have to buy a new hard line, so saves me a little bit of money and a little bit of time too. So use what we got. But I'm gonna start tightening everything up, this clamp around the axle, cinch it down where I want it, make a couple maybe more little tweaks, see if I can get that little kink out of it, and we'll be good. So we're gonna use our line wrench to make our final adjustments to get these all snugged up. It's really important to use this kind of wrench when you're doing these brake lines, because those nuts are so small you can spin pretty easy, and that's the last thing you want to do. Once you start rounding off those little fittings, so I forget it, they're done, then you're going to be getting the vice grips, right? And that is not what we want to do. Now, one thing I did learn, especially with these stainless lines, is you want to, like, if they're new, you want to tighten them up, back them off, re-tighten again. It takes a little more effort to get them seated, but once they're seated, they don't leak. You know, they seal up great. Because I've read online and heard people complain about, oh, they leak, and yeah, the first time I tried using them, you think they're tight, and they are tight, but you got to really make sure they're mated to the other end of the flare. So it takes a little bit of work to get them seated and reseated, but once they are, should be good. All right, so that line's done. Now we're going to torque our banjo bolt down to the caliper. Let's go get the torque wrench. Again, they say 15 to 20. Now on 17. Splitting it. These lines have these rubber grips. You can hold that rubber grip area. So make sure it doesn't spin so you don't lose your orientation. And there it was, you heard it. All right, that side is done. All right, let's take a look. So again, we have our line all coming in. I already tightened this one up, and then I have this one all kind of straightened out, and it goes over the U-bolts. It's all clear, and it makes a little turn over the axle housing into the jounce line, and then underneath. And there's that guy all torqued, and I like it. Looks pretty good. Like I said, we have a couple extra kinks, but shoot, no one's ever gonna see that except for me, so I'll live with it. I like it. And there it is, man. Rear brakes on the driver's side anyway is done. Looks awesome. Man, what a difference. Cannot wait to get wheels and tires on this thing. But we still have more work to do. I'm gonna go and wrap up the other side, and I'll show you what I had to do to finish all that and how that looks. We're knocking this one down. So let's take a look at the rear brake line, the hard line that I bent up. Same type of thing I did on the other side. Works really well. I do have more of a kink on this one, that's for sure, but just couldn't quite get it out. But anyway, I'm happy with it. It's gonna work. And there they are. Final shot here is the passenger side rear. But man, I love the way these things turned out. We have matching rears to the fronts, and we have the 13-inch rotors, 4 pistons in the back, 6 up front. So now I have to figure out what I'm going to do with my emergency brake cable. So that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. If you turn on the bell notification, you'll be notified each and every time I upload a new video. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.